Germany, the car industry is king, and that key sector looks set to face a harsh new reality soon.
President Trump signing an order just a few hours ago for a 25% tariff on auto imports, taking effect next Wednesday. Let's take a listen.
What we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff.
A political decision has just sent shockwaves through the automotive world. President Trump has signed an executive order slapping a 25% tariff on all imported cars and light trucks, a move that instantly rattled Wall Street, auto executives, and car buyers alike. At first glance, it sounds like a patriotic play, a push to protect American jobs and force foreign brands to build in the US. But beneath the headlines lies a far more complicated reality. This isn't just about sticker prices at dealerships. It's about entire supply chains grinding under pressure, global brands scrambling to protect their market share, and consumers bracing for a wave of price hikes and shortages. Imagine the luxury German automakers, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Audi, suddenly facing a market where their bestsellers become unaffordable overnight. Imagine American workers, who are supposed to benefit, instead wondering if their own paychecks are at risk. The truth is, this tariff isn't just a tax, it's a system shock, a sudden jolt to one of the world's most complex industries, and what happens next could redefine not just how cars are sold in the US, but how the entire global auto industry is built. Real quick, if you're into videos that cut through the noise and break things down clearly, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find this. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. We've got more deep dives coming your way. Also, drop a comment and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your take. Now onto the video. When the ink dried on Trump's executive order, the auto industry didn't just brace for turbulence, it braced for an earthquake. A 25% tariff on imported vehicles is no small policy tweak. It's a blunt instrument, a hammer swung at a sector worth billions, with ripple effects reaching from Stuttgart to Detroit and from Tokyo to Seoul. At the center of this storm are the German automakers, who for decades have dominated the US luxury segment. BMW's X5, Mercedes-Benz's C-Class, Audi's Q7. These aren't just cars, they're status symbols, woven into the fabric of American consumer culture. But under this new tariff regime, those symbols come with a catch, an extra 25% cost slapped onto every unit not built on American soil. Overnight, a $60,000 SUV morphs into a $75,000 gamble for the buyer. That kind of jump isn't just a pinch, it's a deterrent. But here's the kicker. It's not just German brands that are in trouble. Japanese giants like Toyota and Honda, South Korean players like Hyundai and Kia, and even American automakers who rely on imported parts are about to feel the squeeze, because in today's auto industry, no car is 100% local. Even if it rolls off an assembly line in Alabama, Michigan, or Texas, chances are it contains modules, electronics, or drivetrains sourced from abroad. Tariffs don't distinguish between luxury badges and mass-market sedans. They hit everything in their path. Executives now face an impossible calculation. Do they raise prices and risk alienating buyers? Do they absorb the costs and watch their profit margins evaporate? Or do they slash portfolios, pulling slower-selling models from the US market altogether? Each option is a lose-lose scenario. Raise prices and demand dries up, absorb costs and investors revolt. Cut models and you risk abandoning loyal customers who may never return. What makes this even more devastating is the timing. The industry is already under immense pressure from the electric vehicle revolution, shifting consumer tastes, and sky-high interest rates that are keeping buyers away from showrooms. Throw a 25% tariff on top, and suddenly, even the strongest brands look vulnerable. Consider the domino effect. A BMW executive in Munich can no longer just think about engineering excellence. Here now, they're forced into emergency meetings with finance teams, lawyers, and logistics managers. Every bolt, every touchscreen, every transmission becomes a liability. Our suppliers demand answers. Dealers beg for clarity. Workers wait to see if their shifts will be cut. This is not business as usual. This is survival mode. And yet, what makes this shockwave truly remarkable is how fast it spreads. Within hours of the announcement, markets reacted. Auto stocks slid. Analysts rushed to update forecasts. Politicians in Europe and Asia started hinting at retaliation.
In an industry where stability is the lifeblood of planning, uncertainty became the only certainty.
The 25% tariff is more than just an economic penalty. It's a stress test for globalization itself. The auto industry, with its sprawling supply chains and delicate balancing acts, is like a high-performance engine, efficient when finely tuned, but liable to seize up when one component misfires. And this tariff It's not a misfire. It's a wrench thrown straight into the gears. But while boardrooms scrambled and spreadsheets lit up in red, the shock didn't stop there. The next link in the chain, the factories, would soon feel the tremors most acutely, and what unfolded behind those closed factory gates revealed just how fragile this industry really is. If the tariff announcement was the spark, the factories became the tinderbox. Modern car manufacturing is not a simple linear process. It is a sprawling orchestra of suppliers, engineers, and logistics networks, all operating in perfect synchronization. When one player misses a beat, the entire performance stumbles. The new 25% tariff wasn't just a beat missed, it was an entire movement cut short. Inside production plants in the US and abroad, executives scrambled to rerun cost models. Suddenly, imported transmissions, advanced driver assistance modules, and specialized electronics weren't just expensive, they were borderline unaffordable. Assembly lines built on just-in-time supply chains could no longer count on predictable delivery schedules or stable landed costs. That uncertainty triggered ripple effects across every department. Tooling engineers realized that parts sourced abroad would need to be replaced with domestically produced substitutes, which requires months of requalification. Software teams warned that critical components like infotainment modules couldn't simply be swapped out without lengthy validation cycles. Even something as small as packaging specifications became a bottleneck, since every container, pallet and shipment had to be recalculated under the new pricing models. Factories thrive on predictability. Workers plan their lives around shift schedules, managers build weekly production targets, and suppliers coordinate shipments down to the hour. But tariffs introduced chaos into this delicate ecosystem. Managers faced the harsh reality of deciding whether to slow lines, pause models, or risk costly mistakes by rushing substitutes through the pipeline. The broader message was clear. Tariffs don't just impact the finished car that rolls out of the plant. They reverberate through the invisible scaffolding of the industry, the engineering drawings, supplier schedules, and quality gates that keep vehicles safe and reliable. One disruption at the top of the chain trickled down to thousands of quiet corners of the production floor. And as the factories trembled, the consequences soon spilled over into the front lines of the auto business, the dealerships. For consumers, the impact was about to become very real. Walk into a dealership under normal circumstances, and you expect a polished experience. Sales managers highlight trim options, service staff reassure you about reliability, and buyers weigh colors and upholstery. But in the wake of the tariff shock, conversations inside US showrooms took a sharp turn. Floor plan financing, the loans dealerships used to stock their inventory, became more expensive overnight. Holding costs rose as managers struggled to predict which cars would move quickly and which would sit idle with inflated sticker prices. Dealerships that once thrived on a predictable flow of imports now found themselves with leaner allocations and far murkier delivery timelines. Customers noticed the difference immediately. Instead of debating whether to splurge on heated seats or a panoramic roof, many buyers were asking a very different set of questions. Would this car even arrive on time? Why did its price jump thousands of dollars since last week? And were there cheaper alternatives elsewhere in the market? Service departments, too, were caught in the storm. Parts pipelines grew uncertain. A warranty repair that once required a quick order from overseas now demanded creative substitutes, alternatives that had to be tested and approved without breaking compliance standards. For dealerships, transparency became the only shield. Managers were forced to communicate openly with buyers, explaining that delays and shortages were the new normal. A showroom thrives on stability and consumer confidence. Variance is its enemy. With tariffs throwing every projection into doubt, retailers braced for the kind of uncertainty that makes or breaks entire networks. And if customers were unsettled, so too were the workers who built and sold these cars. Their livelihoods were suddenly tethered to the unpredictable world of global trade. When the tariff announcement hit headlines, it wasn't just executives and dealers who felt the pressure. The impact cascaded quickly down to the people whose livelihoods depend on predictability. The workers on the factory floor and the suppliers who keep production lines running. For the workforce, stability is more than a corporate buzzword. It's the foundation of daily life. Skilled technicians, assembly line workers, and engineers rely on clear schedules to plan their overtime, maintain their training cycles, and budget for their families. But tariffs blurred that horizon. Suddenly, overtime that had once been guaranteed was in question. Training programs were delayed. Shift structures had to be re-evaluated as management tried to match uncertain production forecasts with the reality of global supply disruptions. A worker who had spent years honing expertise on a particular platform might suddenly be asked to cross-train on a different line just to keep employment steady. For some, that was a lifeline, ensuring paychecks continued. For others, it was a stark reminder that stability in this industry could vanish overnight. leaders scrambled to provide realistic milestones and credible contingency plans, because without guidance, uncertainty would lead to fear, and fear spreads faster than any memo. Meanwhile, suppliers faced their own existential crisis. A parts manufacturer that had built its business around one luxury brand suddenly had to confront the possibility that orders could shrink dramatically. Those with diversified portfolios, supplying both passenger vehicles and commercial fleets, had some cushion, but smaller, specialized firms found themselves staring down the barrel of collapsing revenue streams. Bridge financing became the only hope for many suppliers. Loans were secured not for growth, but for survival. Force majeure clauses in contracts offered little protection, because even if companies were technically excused from performance, the math still didn't work. Suppliers still had to pay employees, maintain equipment, and manage logistics costs. What they needed most wasn't legal loopholes, but collaborative forecasting from their automaker partners, a shared commitment to weathering the storm, rather than leaving smaller players to fend for themselves. Those who had run scenario planning exercises in advance were better positioned. If they had pre-modeled tariff bans, they could dust off playbooks instead of scrambling from scratch. But for the majority, this was trial by fire. And as the suppliers wrestled with survival, many asked a haunting question: if luxury imports were pulling back, wouldn't this open the door for domestic automakers? The answer was not as straightforward as it seemed. On the surface, it might look like American automakers stood to benefit from the tariff shock, with foreign luxury brands facing steep price hikes. Detroit's Big Three, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, could suddenly enjoy less competition in the premium segments. But peel back the layers, and the story becomes far more complicated. Domestic automakers are not insulated from global supply chains. Even vehicles built proudly on US oil often rely heavily on imported components. Advanced driver assistance systems from Asia, specialized driveline parts from Europe, semiconductors from Taiwan, or battery cells sourced from South Korea. Tariffs didn't stop at finished vehicles. They touched modules and components as well. That meant American brands, too, would feel the sting in their cost structures. But the risk wasn't just higher costs, it was the danger of stagnation. For decades, the presence of strong competition from European and Asian brands forced US automakers to innovate faster, improve quality, and sharpen engineering. Without that constant rivalry, there's a temptation to grow comfortable, lowering the bar for performance and design. Analysts warned that without the external pressure, Detroit risked falling behind on global innovation trends. At the same time, export strategies were under threat. Many American-built SUVs and pickup trucks are exported abroad, especially to Europe and Asia. If trading partners retaliated with counter-tariffs, those outbound shipments would suddenly become far less competitive. A vehicle designed for US dominance could lose ground in foreign markets overnight. Ports, rail yards, and trucking corridors, the arteries of America's export economy, could all feel the strain. For American automakers, the dilemma was clear. Reduced competition at home might offer a short-term reprieve, but it came paired with escalating costs, supply chain headaches, and the looming threat of retaliation abroad. The open highway, many expected, quickly revealed itself as a minefield. And while Detroit worked to navigate its way through the crosswinds, the global stage was already shifting. Trading partners, unwilling to absorb the blow quietly, began plotting their own countermeasures. What started as an American tariff decision was about to spark a broader economic confrontation. The auto industry has always been a global chessboard, and tariffs rarely move in just one direction. Within days of the US announcement, whispers of retaliation began circulating in Brussels, Berlin, and Tokyo. Trading partners weren't about to stand still while their flagship exports were penalized. Counter-tariffs were the logical response, and they threatened to escalate the crisis into a full-blown trade war. For Europe, the move struck a nerve. Germany, whose economy leans heavily on automotive exports, viewed the 25% tariff not just as an economic threat, but as a direct assault on one of its crown jewels. Political leaders began signaling that American exports, from SUVs to agricultural goods, could face equivalent penalties, and that meant US automakers shipping vehicles to Europe could suddenly find themselves locked out of key markets or forced to slash margins to remain competitive. The impact rippled far beyond corporate balance sheets. Ports that once bustled with two-way shipments slowed. Trucking corridors feeding those ports felt the drop in volume. Rail yards that handled thousands of outbound vehicles every week began to empty. What had been a steady rhythm of global trade turned into an uneven pulse. Japan and South Korea, both major exporters to the US, considered similar moves. Even if they didn't impose tariffs at the same scale, they had leverage through regulatory measures, safety standards, and other non-tariff barriers that could complicate American exports. Retaliation doesn't always look like a mirror image tax. Sometimes it's 1,000 smaller hurdles that add cost and delay. For global automakers, the lesson was harsh but clear. Reliance on a single market is dangerous. Companies began accelerating strategies to diversify destinations, shifting shipments to Canada, Mexico, and emerging markets. Flexible production became the mantra, the ability to swing between trims and destinations depending on where tariffs hit hardest. Governments and industry groups also stepped up their dialogue. Lobbyists urged Washington to reconsider or at least carve out exemptions for certain parts and components. Diplomats pressed for alignment on standards that could smooth cross-border flows, but the undercurrent was undeniable. The age of predictable, rules-based global trade was faltering, and uncertainty had become the new normal. And yet, amid all this geopolitical maneuvering, one group remained front and center. The consumers, buyers sitting in US showrooms, wallets in hand, were about to face choices that would redefine how and what they drove. At the end of the day, no matter how complex the supply chains or how heated the boardroom debates, the ultimate burden of tariffs always falls on the buyer. Consumers walking into showrooms after the tariff announcement quickly realized they were stepping into a different world. Sticker shock became the new reality. A family that had been saving for a luxury SUV suddenly discovered that the same vehicle now cost $10,000 or $15,000 more. For many, that jump placed dream cars firmly out of reach. The psychological impact was just as powerful as the financial one. Even buyers who could technically afford the increase hesitated, unsure if they were getting real value for their money or if they were simply paying a political premium. This hesitation rippled across consumer behavior. Some buyers chose to delay purchases altogether, hoping the trade environment would stabilize. Others shifted to different segments, trading in the idea of a German luxury sedan for a more affordable Japanese compact, or even a certified pre-owned model. Dealers who once moved new cars with ease suddenly found themselves fielding questions about financing flexibility, extended warranty packages, and long-term service costs. The financing environment added another layer of difficulty. Interest rates, already elevated, made loans more expensive. Combine that with higher vehicle prices, and monthly payments began to climb into unsustainable territory for many households. Leasing, once an attractive option, also grew complicated as residual value projections had to be recalculated under new tariff-inflated prices. Lenders grew cautious, tightening terms and demanding higher credit scores. For automakers and retailers, transparency became critical. Communication shifted from glossy brochures and showroom pitches to plain-spoken explanations. Dealers had to look customers in the eye and admit that certain trims were delayed, some options were unavailable, and prices were rising for reasons beyond their control. Ironically, this honesty built trust in some cases, with customers appreciating candor during a turbulent time. But not every buyer responded with patience. Some walked away entirely, choosing to hold on to their current vehicles longer than planned. This decision fed into the growth of the used car market, where demand surged for well-maintained models that bypassed the tariff premium. Certified pre-owned programs flourished as consumers sought a middle ground, the reassurance of warranty coverage at a fraction of new car prices. In the bigger picture, affordability sat at the center of consumer decisions. When transaction prices rise, purchase intent falters. This basic economic truth became painfully clear across the industry. Automakers scrambled to introduce loyalty incentives, sweetened maintenance plans, and creative financing to stabilize demand. Yet even the best offers couldn't erase the reality. Tariffs had fundamentally shifted the equation for American car buyers, and while consumers were recalibrating their budgets, a quieter but equally significant question emerged. What would happen to innovation? Would tariffs slow down the pace of technological advancement, just as the auto industry stood on the edge of its electric and digital revolution? Beyond the showroom floor and quarterly earnings calls, the tariff shock cast a long shadow over the future of automotive technology and sustainability. The industry was already in the middle of its most significant transformation in a century, the shift toward electrification, autonomous systems, and software-defined vehicles. Tariffs threatened to slow that momentum at precisely the wrong moment. Consider the technology pipeline. Infotainment systems, battery management software, and driver assistance hardware evolve on rapid development cycles. Many of these rely on highly specialized components produced in Asia and Europe. By making those imports dramatically more expensive, tariffs risk delaying adoption. By making those imports dramatically more expensive, tariffs risked delaying adoption. A car that should have launched with cutting-edge driver assistance might be forced to rely on older, cheaper alternatives. A battery pack designed with next-generation chemistry might never make it past the drawing board if costs spiraled out of control. To counteract this, engineering teams leaned harder into modular design. The idea was simple: build platforms flexible enough to accept components from multiple suppliers across different regions. That way, if one source became too expensive or politically risky, the system could pivot without losing functionality. Software-defined architectures also gained traction, allowing updates and features to be decoupled from specific pieces of hardware. This flexibility gave automakers room to maneuver around tariff-driven bottlenecks. At the same time, sustainability goals remained non-negotiable. Electrification, emissions reduction, and circular battery economies weren't optional add-ons. They were imperatives, demanded by regulators, investors, and consumers alike. Ironically, tariffs sometimes push companies toward greener solutions. Shorter, regional supply chains meant fewer carbon-intensive shipping miles. Localized recycling initiatives reduced dependency on foreign mines and boosted domestic green industries. But achieving these gains required investment, and that was no small challenge. Tariffs thinned margins, limiting the resources companies could allocate toward long-term projects. Leaders faced tough trade-offs: invest in resilience and sustainability now, or preserve cash to survive an uncertain market. Some managed both, pursuing partnerships with universities, tech firms, and recyclers to share costs and accelerate innovation. Others, less prepared, risked falling behind. Workforce development became another cornerstone of resilience. Apprenticeships, vocational programs, and vendor-agnostic training ensured that technicians and engineers possessed portable skills. In an unpredictable environment, people became the most durable assets, capable of adapting to new tools, collaborating across borders, and maintaining quality even under pressure. What emerged from this turmoil was a recognition that the automotive industry is no longer just about cars. It is about systems. Systems of production, systems of energy, and systems of talent. Tariffs may have been the trigger, but they revealed deeper vulnerabilities and forced companies to rethink their foundations. As the dust began to settle, one thing became clear: this wasn't just a clash over trade policy, it was a test of globalization itself, and of whether the auto industry could adapt to an era where shocks and uncertainty are the rule, not the exception. The 25% tariff was more than a policy decision. It was a stress test, one that exposed the fragility of a system built on tightly synchronized global supply chains. From factories to dealerships, from suppliers to consumers, every link in the automotive ecosystem felt the strain. For workers, it meant uncertainty about jobs and futures. For suppliers, it was a fight for survival. For automakers, both foreign and domestic, it was a stark reminder that no company can truly stand alone in a globalized industry. And for buyers, it was a new era of tough choices, where affordability and trust outweighed luxury and prestige. The broader lesson is simple but sobering. Sudden shocks don't just change prices, they change behaviors, strategies, and even the trajectory of innovation. Tariffs may fade or be renegotiated, but the scars they leave behind, in boardrooms, on assembly lines, and in household budgets, last much longer. The question now is not whether the industry will recover.
It always does.
The question is what it will look like after this storm. More regionalized, more resilient, but also more cautious. For car makers and consumers alike, one truth remains. In a world of uncertainty, the only constant is change, and how we adapt to it will define the road ahead. Once again, thanks for watching this video. If you got something out of this, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. And hey, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Agree, disagree, or something in between. I'd love to hear it.